Have you ever wondered what you'd do if your life depended on a teenager? Not just any teenager, but one you've never met, one you've never believed could handle even simple responsibilities, let alone land a plane. This isn't a hypothetical question. This really happened, and the story you're about to hear might just change the way you think forever. The flight from Phoenix to Portland started just like any other day. Uneventful, predictable, boring. At seat 21C, 17-year-old Jasmine Brooks sat quietly, hoodie pulled over her head, listening to her favorite Aviation podcast. She wasn't the kind of teenager you'd normally notice. Quiet, studious, introverted, the kind of girl teachers overlooked and classmates barely acknowledged. What they didn't know, what no one really knew, was that Jasmine was obsessed with aviation. Ever since she was 8, Jasmine had dreamed of soaring through clouds, just like her father. Marcus Brooks, a decorated Air Force pilot who lost his life in a tragic training accident 7 years ago. After his death, Jasmine consumed everything she could find about flying: manuals, simulations, historical documentaries, even black box recordings of plane emergencies. Her room looked less like a teenager's haven and more like a pilot's cockpit. She'd applied to flight academies multiple times, and each time, the response was the same: too young, too inexperienced, emotional instability due to trauma. It was those rejections that fueled Jasmine's quiet defiance. She studied harder, learned faster, and memorized emergency procedures that seasoned pilots had forgotten. But today, all of Jasmine's preparation was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. Midway through the flight, everything changed. It began with a jolt, like hitting turbulence, but worse, sharper, violent enough to spill coffee and send flight attendants grabbing seats for balance. Passengers looked around, alarmed but uncertain. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice crackled briefly over the speaker before cutting off entirely. Panic immediately followed. Overhead compartments snapped open, bags tumbled out, and the oxygen mask deployed, dangling uselessly above frightened passengers. Flight attendants rushed the aisle, banging frantically on the cockpit door, but there was no response from the pilots. The intercom remained ominously silent, amplifying the fear rapidly spreading through the cabin. Jasmine felt her heart pound against her ribs, her mind racing with scenarios she'd studied countless times. She clenched her fists, taking deep, deliberate breaths. She had never imagined actually facing an emergency like this, but now it was real. People's lives were hanging in the balance. A man in row 19 stood up, shouting, "What's going on? Someone needs to do something." "Both pilots aren't responding," one attendant whispered shakily, inadvertently loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Gasps and screams erupted like wildfire. "Let me help!" Jasmine suddenly shouted, standing up. Her voice cut sharply through the chaos. Instantly, heads whipped around to stare at the young, black teenager, now standing boldly in the aisle. "You?" sneered a businessman in a suit, scoffing openly. "Sit down, kid. This isn't a joke." "She's just a child," another voice echoed angrily from the back. "She'll get us killed." Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she steadied her voice, firm yet calm, louder this time. "I've studied emergency flight protocols. I can stabilize the aircraft." Laughter, disbelief, and bitter scoffs rippled throughout the cabin. A woman grasped her husband's arm, muttering prayers. Another passenger yelled furiously, "Don't listen to her! Get her back in her seat!" Jasmine ignored the shouts. Her eyes locked onto the nearest flight attendant, a woman named Kara, whose trembling fingers revealed her terror. "You have no communication, the autopilot's disengaged, and both pilots are down. Let me into the cockpit," Jasmine implored, her voice urgent but calm, filled with confidence born from years of meticulous study. Kara hesitated, eyes darting between the desperate passengers and Jasmine. "You're not a pilot. You're just a teenager," Kara whispered shakily. "A teenager who knows exactly what to do," Jasmine countered, desperation creeping into her voice. "We're running out of time. Let me help you." Just then, another violent jolt shook the aircraft, tilting it sharply. Bags flew, people screamed. Jasmine grasped the seat to steady herself. The fear in the cabin thickened like smoke. A young boy, no older than 8, approached Jasmine timidly, tugging at her sleeve. "Are we going to crash?" he asked, eyes wide and scared. Jasmine knelt down, meeting his gaze evenly. "No, we're not. I promise." The boy's innocent trust was the final push Kara needed. She nodded, determination flickering briefly in her eyes. "Follow me." Together, they pushed through panicked passengers, reaching the cockpit door. Kara entered the emergency code, unlocking it. The cockpit was eerily silent and dark. Both pilots slumped unconscious, oxygen masks loose and useless. Jasmine slid into the co-pilot's seat, fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the controls. She scanned the instruments swiftly. Altitude falling rapidly, heading dangerously off course, and fuel pressure fluctuating. "You sure about this?" Kara whispered, fear evident in her tone. "No choice," Jasmine answered, eyes fixed firmly on the horizon. "Tell everyone to brace. It's going to be rough." Jasmine took control of the yoke, feeling the enormous weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She adjusted the trim, recalibrated navigation, and attempted communication again. Nothing but static. Outside, storm clouds gathered ominously, lightning flashing across the sky. "I can't see a thing," Kara gasped, gripping the cockpit doorway. "You don't have to," Jasmine said calmly, even as her heart pounded furiously. "I've got this." In that moment, Jasmine became more than just a passenger. She became a symbol of hope and defiance against every doubt, every prejudice that had ever told her she couldn't. Because sometimes the most unlikely person can change everything. But would Jasmine's courage and preparation be enough to save the plane? Or was the worst still to come? The storm roared fiercely around the plane, gusting winds battering the fuselage as Jasmine clung tightly to the controls. Her heart thumped wildly, adrenaline surging through her veins. Yet somehow, amid all the chaos, she felt strangely calm. Every hour she had spent studying, every simulation she had completed, every note she'd scribbled down late at night now raced clearly through her mind. But this wasn't a textbook scenario. This was real life, and over 200 lives depended solely on her, a 17-year-old girl with no formal flight training. Kara hovered nervously behind Jasmine. "Are you really sure you know what you're doing?" "Honestly," Jasmine replied, gripping the yoke tighter, "no one is ever completely sure, but I'm the best shot we've got." The flight attendant nodded hesitantly, moving toward the intercom to address the passengers, her voice shaking but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves for turbulence. Please remain calm. We're doing everything possible." Jasmine inhaled deeply, her eyes darting across the instruments again. The plane's altitude was still dropping dangerously, the heading veering off course toward jagged mountain terrain below. She adjusted the yoke firmly, correcting the descent angle as best she could. The plane shuddered violently beneath her touch, resisting her inputs like an angry beast. Suddenly, the cockpit door swung open, and an elderly man appeared, white hair tousled, eyes sharp and clear despite the chaos. "I used to be Air Force," he announced calmly, his voice steady and reassuring. "Name's Walter Bishop. Mind if I help?" Jasmine felt relief flood through her, even as the plane lurched again. "Please," she said, voice cracking slightly, grateful for someone with experience at her side. Walter took the jump seat behind her, quickly scanning the cockpit. "What's our situation?" "We're losing altitude fast. Autopilot and comms are dead. Pilot's incapacitated," Jasmine reported succinctly. "Okay, young lady, talk me through your thought process," Walter encouraged calmly. "I'm trying to stabilize our descent and find an emergency landing spot," she explained hurriedly, glancing at the altimeter, which showed a steady and terrifying decline. "But the controls feel heavy, like hydraulic systems are compromised." Walter nodded slowly, assessing her moves. "Good instincts. You've adjusted the trim well. Now you need to redistribute thrust to stabilize the engines. Slightly reduce power on engine 2. Jasmine responded immediately, her fingers flying across switches and levers as Walter's calm voice guided her actions. The engines growled in response, vibration lessening somewhat, but the plane remained unstable, battered relentlessly by fierce winds. Outside, lightning crackled ominously close, illuminating the clouds in eerie bursts. Jasmine swallowed hard, sweat beading on her forehead. She focused her mind fiercely, pushing aside the fear and doubts that threatened to overwhelm her. "Listen, Jasmine," Walter said, leaning forward with a reassuring firmness in his tone. "Fear's natural, but it's just noise. Focus on what you know." "I know we need an emergency landing site now," Jasmine replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mackenzie Ridge," Walter suggested confidently, pointing to the map on the display. "Old emergency strip, rough terrain, not maintained, but it's your best bet." Jasmine scanned the limited instruments and locked onto the coordinates Walter provided. She adjusted the plane's trajectory cautiously, battling against wind shear that threatened to send them spiraling. In the cabin, anxiety turned to outright panic. Passengers clung desperately to one another, whispers turning to fearful shouts. Julian, the young boy who had approached Jasmine earlier, now stood courageously beside Kara. "She said she'd save us," Julian said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, confidence brightening his small, determined face. "She's just a teenager," shouted the businessman from before, his voice shrill with fear. "She'll kill us all." "No," Julian shouted back defiantly. "She promised." His bravery silenced many, but the tension remained suffocating. Jasmine could hear the muffled panic from inside the cockpit. She gritted her teeth, tightening her grip on the controls. "People don't trust what they can't imagine," Walter murmured, observing Jasmine's frustration. "You're shattering their expectations." "I don't care about expectations right now," Jasmine said sharply, her voice edged with determination. "I care about landing this plane safely." Walter smiled slightly, nodding approvingly. "That's the spirit." A sudden, violent jolt snapped Jasmine's attention back to reality. Engine 2's temperature gauge flashed angrily. "Engine overheating," she announced, dread sinking into her stomach. "You've got this," Walter encouraged. "Throttle back, switch power to Engine 1, and engage cooling procedures." Without hesitation, Jasmine executed Walter's instructions swiftly. The overheating warning diminished slightly, stabilizing the plane momentarily. The relief was short-lived as another violent downdraft slammed into the plane, sending passengers screaming once more. Jasmine toggled the intercom with a trembling finger, speaking clearly, confidently, despite her internal turmoil. "This is Jasmine Brooks. I'm doing everything possible to land safely. I need your trust." A hush swept the cabin, punctuated only by muted prayers and fearful sobs. Jasmine breathed deeply, feeling their silent consent as a heavy responsibility pressing down harder than ever before. "Mackenzie Ridge, 2 miles ahead," Walter announced, his voice steady. "It's now or never." Jasmine leaned forward, her heart hammering relentlessly. "Gear down, flaps at 20 degrees, she commanded herself, recalling the countless simulator sessions she'd practiced late into the night. The landing gear deployed roughly, reassuringly solid beneath the plane. The runway emerged suddenly through the swirling storm, a faded, narrow strip barely discernible in the gloomy twilight. Jasmine steadied the yoke, aligning the plane carefully, fighting cross-winds that threatened to rip control from her grasp. "Steady now," Walter coached quietly, his eyes fixed intently ahead. "Brace yourselves," Jasmine warned, toggling the intercom briefly. The wheels hit the ground with a jarring impact, bouncing the plane back upward. Jasmine wrestled with the controls desperately, steadying it for a second touchdown. The plane landed again, skidding dangerously, wheels screeching against rough pavement. Sparks flew, metal groaned, but gradually, miraculously, the plane slowed and finally stopped. Silence filled the cockpit, thick and palpable. Jasmine sat frozen, gripping the controls, breath shallow and ragged. Walter's hand touched her shoulder gently. "You did it, Jasmine!" A roar erupted from the cabin. Shouts, cries, laughter blending into thunderous applause. Kara stumbled into the cockpit, tears streaming freely. "You saved us all!" Jasmine released the controls slowly, disbelief and relief washing over her. She rose unsteadily, turning toward the cheering cabin. Julian stood proudly, tears glistening in his eyes, whispering to anyone who would listen, "I knew she could do it." But as Jasmine stood amidst grateful survivors, she knew this landing wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the hardest challenges yet to come. Could she survive the scrutiny, doubts and judgments that awaited her on the ground? Would society celebrate or punish her for this unprecedented act? And would the world finally believe in Jasmine Brooks or reject her once again? When the plane finally came to rest, silence wrapped around Jasmine like a cocoon. The passengers' cheers slowly faded into muted whispers and stunned sobs of relief. Jasmine's hands still trembled uncontrollably, her breath shallow, heart racing from adrenaline. She had done the impossible, landed an aircraft in crisis, saving hundreds, but the reality of her extraordinary feat had yet to fully sink in. Outside, emergency crews converged swiftly on the battered plane. Bright lights flashed across the rough runway, illuminating the stunned, grateful faces of the passengers as they filed out into the cold, damp night air. Jasmine stood at the cockpit doorway, supporting herself against the frame. Kara placed a comforting hand on her back. "You were incredible," she whispered earnestly, her eyes bright with admiration. Walter emerged from behind Jasmine, squeezing her shoulder firmly. "I've flown with seasoned veterans who wouldn't have kept their cool half as well as you did, kid." "I was terrified," Jasmine confessed quietly, her voice barely audible over the murmurs outside. "That just means you're human," Walter replied gently. "But courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when your hands shake." As Jasmine stepped cautiously onto the stairs leading to the tarmac, the passengers formed a spontaneous corridor, clapping and cheering. Julian broke free from his mother's grasp, rushing toward Jasmine with open arms, embracing her tightly. "You're my hero," he declared boldly, voice filled with unwavering admiration. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Julian's mother corrected softly, stepping forward with heartfelt gratitude. "You did what no one else could." Yet amid the celebration, Jasmine couldn't ignore the sidelong glances and whispered doubts from some of the other passengers, including the man in the suit, who now watched her skeptically from a distance, his face hard and unforgiving. Within minutes, media trucks swarmed the scene, reporters scrambling for a story. Bright lights blinded Jasmine momentarily, microphones thrust aggressively into her face. "Who are you?" shouted a reporter, voice frantic with excitement. "How did you manage to land the plane without training?" Before Jasmine could respond, another voice cut through the clamor. "She endangered us all," the businessman yelled angrily, pushing his way forward. Cameras swung toward him. "A teenager, taking control without authorization. She could have killed us." Jasmine's throat tightened. The celebratory atmosphere darkened quickly, voices rising in heated debate. "You'd rather we crashed," Julian shouted fiercely, surprising everyone. The crowd fell silent, turning toward the small boy whose voice held more strength than anyone expected. "She was brave when everyone else panicked. She deserves gratitude, not blame." His words resonated deeply, quelling much of the hostile murmuring. Even the skeptical passengers hesitated, glancing at each other with uncertainty. As the reporters pressed closer, Jasmine drew a steadying breath, finally finding her voice. "My name is Jasmine Brooks. I'm 17, and I know I'm not a trained pilot. But tonight, faced with an impossible situation, I did what my father always taught me. Take responsibility and act, even if others doubt you." The reporters fell quiet, captivated by her simple honesty. Jasmine continued, her voice stronger now. "If doing the right thing means breaking the rules, I'd rather face the consequences than live knowing I didn't try." The sincerity in her words silenced the skeptics momentarily. Even the businessman stepped back, uncertainty clouding his face. Jasmine had spoken her truth, clear and unafraid, leaving no doubt about her conviction. In the days that followed, Jasmine's story swept the nation like wildfire, igniting a storm of debate. Some hailed her as a modern-day hero, a brave teenager who defied the odds and saved hundreds. Others criticized her fiercely, labeling her reckless, a dangerous precedent who must face consequences. The Federal Aviation Administration quickly summoned Jasmine for a formal hearing. Sitting in the austere room before a panel of stern officials, she recounted every detail of the harrowing flight. "Miss Brooks," a severe woman with silver-streaked hair began sharply, "your actions violated federal aviation regulations. You understand the seriousness of these charges? Yes, ma'am, Jasmine replied respectfully, her voice firm yet humble. But I acted because lives depended on it. Protocol wouldn't have mattered if we'd crashed. The panel exchanged glances, clearly moved despite their stern demeanors. Walter, seated nearby, rose to speak, his voice strong. I've flown combat missions and trained pilots for decades. What Jasmine did that night was exceptional. Punishing her would send the wrong message. That procedure matters more than lives. The committee deliberated, tension filling the silent room. Finally, the chairwoman spoke again. After careful consideration, we acknowledge that Jasmine Brooks's actions fall under the Good Samaritan exception clause. No penalties will be issued. Furthermore, we recommend expedited enrollment into formal flight training should she choose to pursue it. Relief flooded Jasmine, tears of gratitude slipping silently down her face. Walter squeezed her shoulder gently. Your father would be incredibly proud. Outside, reporters awaited eagerly. Jasmine stepped into a blaze of flashing cameras, microphones extended expectantly. Miss Brooks, what's next? A journalist asked urgently. She smiled softly, determination shining in her eyes. I'm going to fly, officially this time, and I'm going to make sure no other young person's dream gets dismissed because someone else decides they don't belong. Within weeks, offers poured in from flight academies nationwide. Jasmine chose Black Wing's Aviation Academy in Seattle, where Janelle Carter, a pioneering aviator herself, welcomed her personally. Your courage has already changed the conversation, Janelle told her warmly. Now let's show them just how much you truly belong here. Months later, as Jasmine stood confidently before a packed auditorium of aspiring young pilots, she spoke passionately about the barriers she'd faced and overcome. No one believed a 17-year-old black girl could save an entire plane, she declared, her voice strong with conviction. But we did, and today you can too. You are capable, valuable, and powerful, no matter what the world tells you. The applause erupted thunderously, echoing long after Jasmine left the stage. She had transcended the storm, not just saving lives but inspiring countless others to rise beyond society's expectations. That night, beneath the clear Seattle sky, Jasmine sat quietly beside her Cessna trainer, gazing upward at the limitless stars. She pulled out an old photograph of her father, tracing his smiling face gently. We did it, Dad, she whispered, emotions swelling in her throat. Thank you for teaching me courage isn't about avoiding fear, but facing it head on. And as she climbed into the cockpit once more, Jasmine knew her journey was just beginning. Her wings weren't merely meant for flying. They were meant to lift others, carry dreams higher, and soar above every boundary ever placed upon her. Because Jasmine Brooks had proven to the world and herself that sometimes the greatest pilots aren't the ones society expects, but the ones brave enough to defy expectations and fly anyway.